Week 14, Overview, Spanish Dominion and the New World, Aztecs and Incas. This is our last week studying the Age of Exploration. Having taken a look at the big picture of the age, let's go back a few years to the time right after Columbus's expeditions, when further Spanish expeditions followed Columbus across the Atlantic. These men were explorers, but they were also soldiers. Their goal was to find gold and to carve out a new empire for Spain. They didn't care that the Incas and Aztecs already called Central and South America home. The people who once lived in Central and South America practiced many things that God calls abominations. They kept slaves and sacrificed living human beings to idols. Though it's popular nowadays to think of them only as victims, that's not how the neighboring tribespeople viewed them. They were ruthless oppressors, and God had every right to judge them for it, to wipe their cultures off the earth. We've seen this before in the Bible. God used the Assyrians and Babylonians to judge his people in Old Testament times, even though they were the terrorists of the ancient world. Though the sin involved was terrible, there are still important lessons to be learned from studying this sad thread of human history. Throughout our study this week, older students will seek to understand God's perspective on the lives and actions of the Inca and Aztec cultures and the Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s. As we work our way through the history of the world, we get a lot of chances to study geography. This week, we'll touch on Central and South America. Central America is the land bridge between Mexico and South America. The land is rugged. Swampy lowlands near the coast rise up to steep mountains in the middle. Volcanoes dot the landscapes and earthquakes are common. The jungles are full of exotic creatures, bats, monkeys, jaguars, not to mention spiders, scorpions, and mosquitoes carrying tropical diseases. The western coast of South America is a lot like Central America. The low land near the coast quickly rises up into the Andes, a chain of high mountains that stretches all the way down to the frigid ocean surrounding Antarctica. There are glaciers in these snow-covered mountains, and llamas graze in the alpine meadows. East of the Andes, the land falls down and down to the vast jungles of the Amazon basin. Many of the tribes that still live in those jungles have changed very little over thousands of years. There are other peoples, however, that were quite advanced. In particular, the Incas in Peru and the Aztecs in Mexico had gathered astonishing treasures of gold and jewels as they built their native empires. The Aztecs had a huge and complex civilization that centered on a city built in an artificial island in Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico. They raised corn to make tlaxcali, which the Spanish renamed tortillas. The Aztecs ate these by themselves or wrapped them around other foods as tacos. Their cooking was spicy, using lots of chili peppers. They drank chocolate, but only rich people could afford it. Since the Aztecs never invented money, they used cacao beans as one system of payment. Aztec homes were usually built of dried mud adobe bricks. They were simple structures, built more for function than for form. They were skilled sculptors, though, and were quite musical. They had a primitive system of writing, consisting of pictures that could be combined to represent some sounds. It wasn't sufficient to express complicated concepts, but it was good enough for keeping basic records. They invented the wheel, but they only used it on toys. Without wheeled vehicles or beasts of burden, every load had to be carried by human hands. The Aztecs worshipped hundreds of idols. There was Centeotl, the corn god, Tonatiuh, god of the sun, Mictlantecutli, ruler of the dead, Huitzilpatli, god of war, was the special protector of Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs developed complicated mathematics and sophisticated astronomy because they thought it would help them divine the future. The Aztec religion was fatalistic and bloody. They sought good crops by means of many ceremonies that were supposed to appease the gods, mostly through human sacrifice. Human sacrifice is necessarily gruesome, but the Aztecs took it to extremes. Priests slashed open a living victim so they could tear the still beating heart out of his chest. The Aztecs believed the gods needed human hearts and blood to stay strong. Worshippers partook of the food of the gods by eating human flesh. The Aztecs sacrificed children to Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility, but most of their victims were prisoners of war. That's why war was a religious duty for the Aztecs. The ultimate goal for any young man was to be a war hero. Men who took many captives in battle were rewarded back home with property, prestige, and power. Aztec warfare was all about capturing people alive, not killing them in battle. In 1519, the Spanish explorer Hernando Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico. He arrived with 11 ships, 100 sailors, 508 soldiers, and 16 horses. He brought a few small cannons that shot round rocks, plus the normal weapons of his day: muskets, crossbows, pikes, and swords. All that stood between him and victory was the most bloodthirsty army in the world, made up of tens of thousands of holy warriors seeking human sacrifices. Fortunately for Cortez, all those warriors and their practice of turning captives into human sacrifices made all the other native peoples hate the Aztecs. As Cortez marched west, the oppressed subjects of the empire rose up to greet their liberators. That kept the Spaniards from being annihilated on the way to Tenochtitlan, but it wouldn't have been enough to save their little army from an all-out war in the heart of the Aztec Empire. When the Spaniards reached Tenochtitlan, they were astounded at this city on the water. They compared it to Venice, which older students will be learning about this week as they continue to study the Italian Renaissance. The Aztecs might have thought this island city would be easy to defend, but the Aztec Emperor, Montezuma II, did not even try to keep the Spaniards out. Nobody's really certain why. An Aztec legend said the god Quetzalcoatl had sailed across the sea and would return someday. Montezuma may well have thought that Cortez was a god. All the records of their first encounter make it look that way. Cortez entered the capital city without a fight, and then took Montezuma prisoner. He didn't kill him, though. For several months, Cortez used the emperor as his puppet. The next year, however, the Aztecs rebelled and drove the Spaniards out of Tenochtitlan. Montezuma was wounded in the battle and soon died. Cortez reorganized his troops and laid siege to the island city. That was when the Aztecs began to realize the power of the Europeans. The city that seemed invulnerable to Stone Age weapons crumbled beneath the bombardment of cannons. Montezuma's heirs surrendered to Cortez in 1521. Cortez now ruled the Aztec Empire. What an empire it was! Wealth beyond the dreams of avarice began to flow back to Spain. Other Spaniards dreamed of finding golden cities of their own. 10 years later, another conquistador, Francisco Pizarro, did just that. With an army only one-third as big as that of Cortez, Pizarro conquered an empire that was larger, richer, and more advanced than the Aztecs. He took over the South American empire of the Incas. The Incas were amazing. The Inca Empire stretched more than 2,500 miles along the coast of South America. It was big, but not particularly ancient. The Inca Empire began to expand around 1438 and was conquered by the Spanish less than 100 years later, 1532. The Inca were skilled engineers. Their roads linked the distant ends of the empire, and their buildings were huge and skillfully constructed. They irrigated dry lands and terraced steep hillsides. They made beautiful jewelry, but never invented money. They used valuable items like cloth as a system of exchange instead. They never developed writing, yet they used smoke signals to communicate over long distances. They used knotted cords to keep track of things. Different colors meant different items, and the size and placement of knots indicated different quantities. The Inca Empire started growing in 1438, when Emperor Pachacuti put down an invasion by a neighboring tribe. That started a series of wars of conquest that extended the realm from what is now Colombia down into Argentina. Each time the Incas conquered a people, they left the old rulers in charge, as long as they submitted to Inca rule. These subjugated rulers were rewarded and made honorary Incas. The Romans used some similar techniques to build their empire, back in year 1. When Emperor Huayna Capac died in 1527, his 2 sons fought for the throne. Huáscar was the official heir to the empire, but his brother Atahualpa had his own army. After 5 years of civil war, Atahualpa's army defeated Huáscar in 1532. That same year, the Spanish explorer Francisco Pizarro met him in Peru. Pizarro had 167 men with him, but they had horses and were armed with the latest European weapons. The Spaniards invited Emperor Atahualpa to visit their camp. Atahualpa knew about the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs 10 years earlier, but he told the Spanish he was not a coward like Montezuma. He came to see the Spaniards on their own ground. Pizarro concealed his pitiful forces from his Inca visitors. They were hidden in a ring around what appeared to be an empty camp. When the emperor arrived there, a Catholic priest gave him a Bible, and through a translator told him it was God's word. Emperor Atahualpa allegedly held the Bible close to his ear and said, "Why doesn't it speak to me?" Then he threw it to the ground. That was all it took. The Spaniards attacked and overwhelmed 4,000 Inca warriors. They captured Atahualpa and held him for ransom. The emperor paid the ransom, 1 room filled with gold and 2 rooms full of silver, but the Spaniards killed him anyway, leaving the Inca Empire without a head. All the complex machinery of Inca government ground to a halt without its emperor, and Pizarro moved into the vacuum and took over the empire. The Aztec and Inca treasures provided enough gold to make Spain the greatest power of Europe and the world. Spain dominated world affairs from 1521, when Cortes took Tenochtitlan, until 1588, when the Spanish Armada failed to take over England. But what kind of greatness can really be built from the mere ability to steal, to kill, and to destroy? Conquest on its own creates nothing of any lasting value. We've seen this pattern before, and we'll see it again. In Old Testament times, one empire succeeded another with monotonous regularity. During the Middle Ages, the Mongols conquered the largest land empire of all times, and then vanished away with hardly a trace. The Spanish conquistadors accomplished God's purposes in their time, and then passed on, leaving little behind them but ruins.